Brilliant. Oh, I thought it'd be tech. I'm so sorry. So
I'll let Johnny cue things up, but good afternoon. Thank you for your endurance. You are the hardcore that are still here. And so I guess I'm here representing Schmidt Ocean, okay? And I'm on the Science Advisory Board of the Schmidt Ocean Institute. So I'm speaking somewhat on behalf of Schmidt, but also on behalf of myself personally, and also some of my work. This last session was entitled, Inspiration, but thanks to all the other speakers, you're all inspired. So you've made my job a lot easier, and I appreciate that. And I was also asked to end the day and be able to speak about art and science from the perspective of as a collector. And so that's what I'm going to start talk about. So the day was split into two halves, science in the morning and art in the afternoon. But what we all saw was that every speaker was able to show the cross-connection between science and art. And while we're all here to advocate for a strong relationship between art and science, for many decades there was a prevailing belief that art and science represented two different cultures, without an understanding or a respect between them, to the detriment of society and a handicap for solving the world's problems. And the idea of these two cultures originated from a famous lecture given in 1959, the year after I was born, by the British scientist and novelist Charles Percy Snow. And Snow's lecture left such a mark that he created a book, or wrote a book after that, and it generated widespread discussion for many years afterwards about the deep and dangerous divide between humanities and science. However, I think events like today, and certainly the work of the Schmidt Ocean Institute, is proof that we've come a long way since then, where it's more accurate now to speak about a common culture where the forces of art and science are joined together in the exploration and protection of our oceans. And it's happening not just here, but also 5,500 miles away in Southern California, where over the next 5 months, 70 exhibitions and dozens of public programs will be exploring the intersections of art and science. It's a Getty initiative that they are calling Art and Science Collide. I like O for Oceans better, but that's what that you check it out online. Now, personally, for me, art and science has always been a part of my being. And this stemmed from having an antique-dealing father who gave me my artistic eye, and a mother who, as a registered nurse and an educator, encouraged me my interest in science, and specifically my love of the oceans. So what I'd like to share with you today are these two complementary parts of my life. This is the first time I've been to Messums West, but when I learned that ceramics was supported here and exhibited here, then it was easy for me to choose what part of my collection I wanted to show to you and talk about. So I began collecting ceramics 42 years ago when I was still in America studying for my master's degree in marine geology and traveling back home frequently to New York City, where the interest in mid-20th century studio pottery was just taking off. Now, first and foremost, these are beautiful objects made with exceptional skill and technique, but also with a fair amount of chemistry and physics for good measure. And I know at least one ceramic artist in the audience will appreciate that. So I have a movie to play. Let's see. Is that moving around? Where am I? Oh, there am I. Ah, now I see the problem that you've had. Okay. So this bowl was designed and made by Friedel-Josef Kellberg, FHK for short. She trained as a potter and a designer in Austria, but left to work for Arabia, Finland's oldest maker of ceramics. And she's best known for these rice grain vessels, which are very thin-walled porcelain with hand-cut holes, where the glaze fills the holes to create this translucent effect. Her inspiration when she first saw it was a 17th century Chinese dish she had seen in an exhibition, but it took her 11 years to perfect the technique before feeling confident enough to produce it for Arabia. Stig Lindberg was a Swedish designer of ceramics, glass, and textiles, famed for his whimsical designs, like this woman shipwrecked on a deserted island. Notice the quality of how the inlaid silver is sculpted to create her flowing dress. For most of his career, Lindberg was the art director of Gustavsberg, which also happens to be Sweden's oldest maker of ceramics. This is a completely different form. These are one-off studio pots. Here's a selection of 4. Groupings very small. That smallest one is about the size of a thumbnail. Let's briefly cross to the Atlantic for these next 2 potters, both of them husband and wife teams. The first is Edwin and Mary Shire, Americans, self-taught potters who started on the East Coast before leaving for west for Mexico and finally Arizona. This vase is the first important piece of studio pottery that started me collecting 42 years ago. Now the wife, Mary, would throw these wheel-thrown forms adorned with these small appliques, creating the faces, and Ed would handle all the glazing and the kiln work. Their time in Mexico inspired their use of primitive or pre-Columbian design, as seen in this next pot, where they used sgraffito scratched into the surface of the clay before final glazing to create that decoration. Like the Shires, Gertrude and Otto Natzler were a husband and wife team, with Gertrude at the wheel and Otto mixing glazes and working the kiln. They based themselves in California after fleeing Austria following German annexation. This crystalline glaze, it's like twinkling snowflakes. And contrast that with this lava-like crater glaze. The same people made the same pots in their studio, 2 entirely different forms. And theirs was a true collaboration where the form and surface of every pot was discussed beforehand. This elegant bowl with this tiny flared lip, perfectly complemented by the gunmetal glaze that they used. Now, if Otto wasn't holding a pot here, you think he was a chemist with all his mixes behind him, showing jars of antimony, copper, titanium. I'm sure this next potter is going to be recognized by some of you in the audience. Dame Lucy Ree, for many Great Britain's greatest potter of the 20th century. This is a porcelain-footed bowl with green glaze and a manganese rim. Same rim here, same form, but a completely different lava-like glaze. Lucy also was an emigre from Austria, and she created her workshop in a Mews cottage just north of Hyde Park. She found that by adding 3% of silicon carbon to the glaze, she could create this dramatically textured and pitted effect. And as accomplished as Ree was as a potter, she considered her partner, Hans Koper, to be something greater. "I'm a potter," she said, "but Koper is an artist." Like Reed, Cooper had fled Germany before the war. In 1946, he began working in Reed's studio as an assistant. He had no experience with ceramics at all. He was a sculptor. But after 1 week at the wheel, he was proficient enough for Reed to take him on. Cooper's sculptural forms were no longer just a bowl, a jar, or a vase. They were completely different forms, but still true to being a pot. And for me, his use of different surface textures accentuated the sculptural form of his pots, similar to the way a sculptor like Isamu Noguchi would juxtapose a polished surface with a rough one. Sarah Flynn is an Irish potter working today, and she also makes pots with a sculptural feel. After throwing them, she pinches and squeezes her pots to deform their shapes. This lovely celadon glaze is accentuated by the crazing, purposeful crazing. And notice the gradations of the green glaze going from the top to the bottom, and how it folds and it flows like rivulets down into the folds of this pot. Now, these next pieces are much earlier and very, very different. They were all made around the turn of the 19th century by a group of 4 brothers known as the Martin Brothers, working in Southall, London. But these birds, commonly known as grotesques, were made exclusively by the hand of Robert Wallace Martin, their eldest brother and the true artist of the bunch. These are salt-glazed tobacco jars, so they have function to them. And Wallace Martin was trained as a stone carver, and you can see the wonderful modeling in the back of this large bird here. They called them Wally birds. While these were unique birds, one-offs, their bread and butter as a pottery was creating and selling functional wares and less eccentric decorative pieces, like these next 2 vases. Now, these were made in about 1895, and you could see this gourd-type shape is adorned with jellyfish. And this next smaller vase with kind of frightening-looking fish. Perhaps the Martin brothers were very early communicators of ocean life through art. And finally, 2 Japanese pots that mark different times of my collecting. This one I bought in Okinawa, and despite its cool colors, it reminds me of a volcano that has popped with lava flowing down the flanks of the volcano. And contrast that with this recent moon jar by Okiko Harai, a potter throwing today. And this, to me, I get the feeling of these chaotic, jumbled masses of clay on the top remind me of the icebergs that I've seen in the Weddell Sea of Antarctica. Well, thank you for indulging me with my showing you my ceramics. And I just want to go to the next. Here we go. Okay. So I want to bring you back, let's see, 530 years. In 1494, the world was carved up between East and West in terms of exploration and trade. It was a treaty of Tordesillas, and a line was drawn in the Atlantic. And everywhere to the west of that line was free rein for the Spanish to explore and colonize parts of the world. Where everywhere to the east of that line, it was the Portuguese. And that led to the Portuguese finding the sea route, the direct sea route to India going around the Cape in 1498 by Vasco da Gama. Can I make this the whole, is it a way to make the whole, no, just the whole screen? No, just okay, just leave it like this then. So here's the great man, Don Vasco da Gama. He found the sea route to India in 1498, and that started the Portuguese dominance of trade for the East with Europe. And keep this in mind, for 100 years, no other country set foot in the Indian Ocean. It was only the Portuguese. So it wasn't until about 1600 before the Dutch or the English ever even reached it. And they had a 100-year monopoly on trade with not just with India, but further countries west all the way to Malacca. And that was spearheaded by Vasco da Gama. And when he returned back to Portugal in 1499, he was then given rein to create the fourth Portuguese expedition to India, and this was a military mission. His first voyage, he went with just 4 ships, but the next time he went with 20 ships. Now, these are relatively small vessels, maybe about 35 meters long with about 150 people on board. And they were very brutal, dangerous journeys during which very few people actually survived by the end of it. And they either survived, they either died by illness, scurvy, or commonly also by shipwreck. And the shipwreck losses were great during this period. So we set out to actually find these 2 ships from the earliest, one of the earliest voyages led by Vasco da Gama. The ship set out from Lisbon in 1502, and with 60 vessels, with 20 vessels, but 6 were a sub-squadron led by his maternal uncles, Vicente and Bras Sodre. And they came to grief on a small island off the coast of Oman in 1503. And we had just this one photograph produced 70 years later depicting that scene of Bras Sodre's ship here. Perdido means loss or shipwreck on land, and Vicente Sodre, his ship called the Esmeralda, sank in very shallow water here. And to find the location, we found this one letter by a surviving captain in the archives in Lisbon, in the Torre de Tumbes. So we transposed this letter, we translated it, we analyzed it, and came up with some specific geographic clues of where this accident took place, where the shipwrecks took place. And it was either going to be in 2 countries. It was either going to be in the Yemen or in Oman. And the one candidate for Oman was a series of islands off the southern coast of Salalah. There's 5 islands there. They're called the Al-Helenia group of islands, of which only one was people were living on at the time. There was an indigenous population. And here's a satellite image of the island. And we focused on this area here because this is where there was a former village there. When we came to the island in 1998 looking for this ship, 500 years after da Gama's discovery of the sea route, the population had moved from this part of the island to over here. And the reason, because there was a well here, but it finally had gone bad. The freshwater well became brackish and they could no longer be sustained, so they moved to the other part of the island. And we found all this information and decided this is the area that we're going to search for the shipwreck. And this was this scene overlooking that bay, and it met the geographic characteristics described in this letter perfectly. We knew that the Portuguese were there because they were maintaining one of their ships. So they actually drove the ship up onto this sandy beach, heeled it over to its side, and we're caulking the bottom of it. We knew that there were high hills in the background. We knew that they were there living with the Omanis at the time. So we knew that there was water there was the village there, and it was in a shallowed embayment that was protected from the weather in most instances, except for the fact that when the winds came from the north, even, you could see this is a perfectly flat, calm day. Right in this area, the reefs create this funneling effect and the waves build up. So almost with no swell at all, you can have a 3-foot wave over the site. So standing on the top of this cliff, we looked at where's the most likely place to find these 2 ships that had been lost for 500 years. And we started diving here, and in 20 minutes, we found that. In 6 meters of water, these are stone cannonballs, about the size of a bowling ball, but twice as heavy. And there were 15 of them. And they had been sitting in 6 meters. You don't even have to dive. You can just snorkel down to them. And they've been sitting there for 500 years. And that's how quickly the wreck site was found. And over the next 3 seasons, between 2013 and 2015, myself and a team of archaeological divers excavated the entire site, and I'll be showing you the artifacts here. So this is a drone shot looking about where the gully is. All the artifacts were located in this area. It's about 100 meters long, about 8 meters wide. This is only about 2 meters wide. 6 meters out here. This goes to half a meter. And in total, we excavated about 8,000 tons of material, boulders, sand, to get down to the bottom where all the artifacts were. We would anchor here and then dive down, and that's where one of our airlifts are working. So I'm going to show you what it's like now as an archaeological diver to be able to excavate material in this depth of water. So this is an airlift. We have a large industrial air compressor on that beach, about 2 tons and 300 meters of air hose being fed into this nozzle. The air goes up the pipe, it creates a Venturi effect and creates a suction. So what the diver was doing here was sucking away all the sand, and we've probably removed about a half a meter of sand there. We put these 3 meter by 3 meter scaffolding bars down, and then we dissect the bits 1 meter by 1 meter. And so every find, archaeological find, goes into one of these bags. So we know where every single object is to a meter of accuracy. And that's about the best you can do in this shallow depth of water. You can see they're only in about 8 feet of water here with those waves going over the top. So a project of this scope takes quite a lot of people. We had 18 divers making about 4 dives a day, 32 dives in total, and we were assisted by the Omani Navy, by the Air Force. This project was being done in collaboration with Oman's Ministry of Heritage and Culture, and most of my dive team were archaeologists from Bournemouth University. And what I'd like to show to you is some of the 2,000 artifacts that we recovered from the wreck site, and specifically 3 that I've chosen to show how science and technology was used to actually uncover the true identity of these objects. Now, in that depth of water, we're not going to find any wood remains of a ship any longer. The ship that went on land, Bras Sodre's one, the Portuguese actually burned it, salvaged what they could, and so nothing was left of that ship. But Vicente Sodre's ship, they recovered the cannons, but they couldn't recover everything else. But all the wood in that depth of water, because of the wave action, because there's no sediment cover, and the oxygenation basically was all gone. But we were left with these very important artifacts that showed us how the ship was built or rigged. These are two bronze shiv wheels. They're about that big, weigh maybe 20 kilos each. And this gives you an idea of the scale of the ship they were using in terms of hauling their lines up or hauling their sails up. We found objects, well, we found belt buckles to see how people actually dressed. The utensils they used to eat. Now, I mean, these are the most elegant spoons you could imagine. You'd see them in Konrads or something like that. The trade items that they use, these are carnelian beads, all drilled, ready to be brought back. Now, a woman in Europe in the 16th century wearing beads like this would be somebody of a very high status. But this was a military mission. They were going there to settle a score with the Calicut Indians who had destroyed the factory that the Portuguese had set up. So predominantly what we found was munitions. Cannonballs made out of limestone, out of granite. This one is iron, lead shot. A lead shot with iron inside, and the smaller stone cannonballs of various different calibers. Here's our conservator. She's handling a very primitive handgun. We found 3 of these, including the little shot. So they'd be making these on board the ship in a mold. You can see the connection. It would be a mold with a ball and a ball, and there's the cross connection where the lead poured into one space would then flow into the next one. All of this survived after 500 years or so. And the most remarkable thing were these powder chambers. Now, these are essentially the charges that they use, filled with gunpowder, to be able to charge a small breech gun. And a breech gun would be one that they could use like a swivel gun on the back of the ship. They would be aiming it at other ships to be able to take out personnel. They're relatively small, shooting those small iron lead shot. And the idea is that you put it in, use that hammer, that handle to lock it in, you fire it, you take it out, and then you put another one in. So for every swivel gun, you could have 3 of these armed and ready to go, so you could fight very quickly. And for breech chambers of this age, there's only a handful that have been found in the world. 2 from this shipwreck, 1 from here, a couple from here. We found 19 from this one shipwreck. So all the large guns were taken, but the Portuguese left all of these behind. But the one thing that every diver wants to find is a gold coin. And this is what it's like. So we have removed 2.5 meters of sediment to get down to this point. And with our metal detectors, we could actually know that there was a coin in that little crevice. This is a gold Portuguese cruzado. It's essentially the pound coin of the day. And we found 12 of them in total. And it allowed the numismatists in Lisbon to be able to classify the coinage from 1491 to 1501 when the ship left. Up until that time, it wasn't perfectly known. But with these 12 coins, which were new types, you can see some of them have a coin, the cross with the 3 dots. Some don't have dots. And you can see the writing on it. The king at the time was Don Manuel. These ones came out of crevices like that. These 5 have been stained silver because I found them in this clump. And we decided we could clean that silver off, but we decided to keep it there because it would tell the context of how they were found. And as exciting as finding a gold coin is, what I found in the center of this clump was even more amazing. Because what we were able to do was have the conservators break it apart and to see inside. The problem is that all the silver is gone. It's all been oxidized out, and that you just have mineralization. But you still have the facsimile of the coin faces in it. And the way to get into that was to put them into a CT scanner. So I brought him to Warwick University, and with a CT scanner, we're going to go through it, and you'll see one coin with a cross in the center. There it goes. And you can see the writing. And we were able to identify all 28 coins, individual coins, in those clumps, going through that. But the exciting one was this one here. That's the cross that you had seen. And when I sent a picture of this to the numismatist in Lisbon, he sent back to me, it's one of these emails you never forget. David, you have found the lost coin of Dom Manuel. And what I learned after that was, after da Gama found the sea route in 1498, Dom Manuel, the king, commissioned 2 coins, a gold coin called a Portuguesa, which became the standard gold coin. It was much bigger than the Cruzado for over 100 years of trading. And the silver coin was called the Indio for trade with India. But they only manufactured it for about 4 years. So it was incredibly sparse in terms of number. And the only one that existed was in a museum in Brazil, actually in Sao Paulo. This coin here, and it was the only one of its type. And it was so rare, people thought it wasn't even real. They thought possibly it was a fraud. That's why they called it the ghost coin or the lost coin of Dom Manuel. And when we found this one, that proved that this one was real. And the saying here, in hoc signo vinces, was typical of Dom Manuel's outlook in terms of trade and exploration during this period. It basically reads as, with this cross, we shall conquer. And this very, very sad thing is, you may remember years ago in Sao Paulo, their great national museum burnt to the ground. And it's one of the catastrophes of the museum world. And this coin was completely lost. So the only one that exists today is that one. If that's not remarkable enough, in 4 meters of water, we found the bell of a ship lying in a crevice under a boulder. And the bell was in 2 pieces, and this is the top piece. It's completely crusted and corroded, but what you could just about make out was a banner here, and we thought we could see an 8 there. So again, I had the idea, before conservation, where you start cleaning this away, you have to be very, very careful, put it in this industrial CT scanner that I was able to find in Warwick University. And then we scanned it multiple angles. So the guy who's operating this is a PhD in physics, and it takes about 3 hours to do one scan from one angle. So the first day he calls me and he says, okay, I see an 8. So, okay, well, we thought there was going to be an 8. The next day, he scans it again. And he said, and he has no knowledge about the history or the context or the age or anything. He says, David, there's a 9 there. I said, okay, now that's great. That's what we want to see. And he scans it one more time, and he says, I don't know if I can make this out, but I think it's a 4. And this is the composite CT scan of all of those put together, and you can see the banner clearly. And not only that, you can see an M. The shipwreck is Esmeralda. There's the 8, there's the 9, and not that well is the 4. That's the bell. Okay, it's the oldest ship's bell ever found. It's been certified by Guinness. And what's perfect about the date is that that it marks the year that da Gama found the sea route to India. So in terms of Portuguese material culture, this is an incredibly important artifact. But to go one step further, if a marine archaeologist, if the most important thing, he wants to find a gold coin, a bell is pretty good. We find lots of bells. But one of the most amazing things to find is an astrolabe. Okay? And astrolabes were the navigational devices that they used at the time to try to be able to fix their position at sea. You use it to be able to measure the altitude of a celestial object, the sun or a star, to be able to navigate and roughly have an idea of where you are. Now, these things are so rare that every single one, these are maritime astrolabes, not terrestrial ones. And the first time they ever show up anywhere in the literature was in 1480. Columbus used them. He used wooden ones. Da Gama in 1498 used wooden ones. And they're so rare that every single one is found. There's a catalog of them, and they're given a specific number. In 1957, there were only like 6 found. By 1966, there was about 21 found. And I found this one very close to where we found that bell. But it was incomplete. It didn't have, it's got the hole where the alidade moves. The alidade is the thing that you point up to the sun, but the alidade was missing. So that's a picture of it. But what's unique about this one, against all other maritime or marine astrolabes found, it had a symbol of a national state on it. That's the royal crest of Portugal. There, and this is the Esfera Armilar. It's the personal emblem of Dom Manuel I. So before he came to the throne in 1495, he took the Esfera Armilar as his personal emblem. And if you've traveled to Lisbon and you've seen Manueline architecture, Esfera Armilars, or armillary spheres, are located everywhere. On street corners, on squares, on buildings. It's one of the main, it's part of the national flag of Portugal, you'll see today. But how do we prove that this is an astrolabe? Well, I sent the same team from Warwick University to Muscat to be able to use this laser scanner to be able to scan in the highest resolution possible, down to micrometers, the surfaces of the astrolabe. And on the other side, we saw from here to here, one quadrant of it, these small nicks in it. And when we were able to measure it, they all turned out to be basically 5 degrees each. So they were purposely put there. So this was the final evidence that proved it was a maritime astrolabe. It's been certified. It is the oldest. Guinness again certified it as the oldest astrolabe ever found, and there it is, number 108. We're up to now over 100. Now, that's showing how science and technology can uncover the identity of objects, so you'd never even think you could do that before. And while it's not art, to me, they have this feel of art, and they're all in a museum today. So if you are interested in looking at any of this, you can go to Muscat to go visit their National Museum of Oman. It's a tremendous new building, and everything that you've seen is in that museum. And if you have have further interest in this story, because it's in terms of lots of other things we found, the science, the technology, the diving, we have a website called Esmeralda-shipwreck.com, and I encourage you to look at that. And with that, that's the end of my talk. Thank you.
Brilliant. I mean, David, you picked on a welcome topic there with me, with ceramic. And it's lovely to see that duality. I can see how your collecting fascination was as much to do with the practice and the history of those amazing artists that you had there. And I love that. Amazing artist. Hans Koppers is extraordinary. Very, very beautiful things. Thank you. It's that part of the day where I'd just like to sort of dwell on those thoughts for a moment. And if you have any thoughts about, there's a lot to take in about what David's been up to. I guess my first question might be, are you working on anything at the moment?
Yes, well, let's see. Yeah, I didn't talk a little bit about my history. I mean, some of the shipwrecks that I found you may know about, HMS Hood. In Australia, I found the Sydney, I found the Centaur and various things. Most recently, we discovered Shackleton's last ship, Quest. Not the Endurance, this was Quest. This is the ship that he actually died in when he was 47 years old. And the thing that's next on my sights, I've been working on it for a number of years. It's another passion project, I would call it that, is to find the Empire Windrush. Now, we all know about what the Windrush means. They call it the Windrush scandal. It shouldn't be the Windrush scandal, it should be the Home Office scandal. And what we want to do to commemorate and to celebrate the contributions that Windrush people, these are the people who first came to the UK in 1948 to rebuild the country, and over the period of all the way up until the 70s, 500,000 people came, and they made a very important contribution to British society, but we're finding out today how badly they were treated, and you won't find a statue or anything in there in celebrating what they did or marking what they did. And what we felt is we wanted to bring it back not just to commemorating their contribution, but also to that milestone in 1948 where England changed forever. Okay, that is the start of multiculturalism in this country. And I think that's an important milestone. So you don't even have to look at it, but you know when anybody puts, and if there's anything in the news or when there's a picture put up with the Windrush telling that story, there is that picture of the ship docked in London in 1948 in the summertime. It says Empire Windrush, London underneath, and you have dozens and dozens of men on the railings with their arms outraised because they've come to a new land to start a new life. And in the center of that image is an anchor. It's the stern anchor on the ship. And our plan is to find the Windrush, recover that anchor, bring it back to England, conserve it, and use it as a centerpiece to a national monument to the Windrush generation. So that's what's next.
You know where to look?
I know where to look, yes. It's in the ship sank in 1954. It was sailing through the Western Mediterranean. It was actually a transport vessel for the Ministry of Transport, and it had service people on board. And there was an engine room fire, a very bad fire. The ship was a total casualty, total loss. 4 men died in the engine room. They had no chance. Everybody else got off. 1,498 people evacuated from that ship in 1 hour by the crew. It could have been the hugest disaster, compared with Titanic in terms of the number who killed. But everybody got off, and so it's at a depth of 2,800 meters off the coast of Algeria. So yeah, I know where to look.
I think knowing you, you're going to find it. Wow. A question over here.
2 points, I think the last Windrush immigrant died yesterday, I think I'm right in saying. It was in the news. And also, I think there's a statue now in Waterloo Station, isn't there?
Yes, you're correct.
But it's not very grand, though.
Your statement.
No, it's an action. Yeah, you're talking about Alfred Gardner. He was 98 years old, and he passed away, and he was on that voyage. And I don't. They say he's the last one. Sometimes people pop out, but he's the known last one. And there is a statue in Waterloo Station. I think it's a very good statue. It's figurative. But you know what? The Windrush people don't feel it talks to them, because it was essentially Theresa May's apology for the scandal when she was the Home Office minister. It was decided outside of the community. There was no real input, and not everybody came through Waterloo Station. Actually, very few people who settled in this country who consider themselves Windrush people came through Waterloo. So it's a bit of a false location. And so that's the reason why we feel that this anchor is more appropriate to put it in an outdoor space and to speak more broadly, not just for Windrush people and immigration. I'm an immigrant in this country. I'm an economic immigrant in this country. I had it very easy getting in. I got in the normal sort of route. It took long. It wasn't easy. It was 7 years, but I wasn't discriminated against, where I know people who were, and so I think we want to not just use it as for Windrush generation, but for immigration generally across the board. And so that's the reason why we think this anchor would and also getting back to what Mella did with the bone. When you have an actual object, it's a touchstone. It's a tangible connection from that voyage in 1948 to your ancestors. And I have seen this myself personally. I found HMS Hood in 2001, and we recovered the bell in 2015. And if you know the history of the Hood, you know it was the greatest war loss in British naval history. 1,415 men died. And when we recovered that bell, and relatives could come and touch it, it changes. It's so much different than them seeing an inanimate object when they can actually touch it and feel somewhat connected. And we think the anchor will do that like no other object will. And that's the reason why we want to do it.
I think that's a great point.
I have two questions. Little questions, really. The first bowl you showed with the rice patterns in, I was so intrigued by that because as a child I was brought up in Malaysia, and we used to use Chinese rice bowls that I was always told they had those little patterns were rice. Is that you see them in the Chinese supermarkets? And is it the same technique? That was one question. The other question, little one, is that in your off Oman,
Yeah.
the cannonballs at the very beginning, in such shallow water, did the local people who had lived there before the well dried up, were they not familiar with these strange, perfectly round objects in such shallow water just off their coast?
But by the time...
Weren't curious, perhaps?
To answer the first question, today probably those holes are punched in by machines when Friedel Hosel-Kelberg was doing it, it was very intensive, and she had a team of 20 people doing that, have to hand cut them in.
How do they do? How you put rice grains in?
No, there's no rice there. It's a hole, and the glaze fills the hole, and it creates that translucent effect. But it's a very difficult technique. It took her 11 years to do it. And in terms of the cannonballs, everybody had moved to the other end of the village. So to get to that bay, you could not get there. The only way to get there is by boat. Crossing over land through that mountainous interior of the island is incredibly difficult and actually quite dangerous. Now the Omanis have blasted with dynamite a road from one end of the village all the way down to that beach. So the first year we came there was nothing. The next year there was a 20-car parking lot where people could literally snorkel out, take a left turn, and 350 meters away in that depth of water were all those objects. And that's when we knew, while we were diving that year, they were blasting, and underwater, we could feel the dynamite going off. And we decided we're pulling everything up because now it's all vulnerable. Before that time, you could not get to that beach. It was just so remote. I mean, the islands are 45 miles off the coast of southern Oman, which already is a fairly sparsely populated location of the world. And you can't get to the islands. The only island you can get to is Al Halinia by a small plane or a boat. So it was just so remote and so rarely visited that we were the first, knowing what we were looking for, to see those cannonballs. I mean, we found lots of fishing leads. So they were obviously fishing over the sites, but they just didn't know what was down there.
David, I mean, I feel like it's such a great way to kind of round out. Thank you for being all of this. I wonder if you have other questions. We might kind of like break and head off to the bar. And
Perfect time you find it.
there's a question online. Lots of questions online.
But a younger viewer has
Yes.
asked, what do you love more, shipwrecks or ceramics?
Oh, wow. Fair question.
That's a very hard question. I guess, you know what I could say, I collect shipwrecks too, because because people would always ask you, how many have you found or what are you going to find next? So I have found 29 major shipwrecks, but I probably have about 60 pieces of ceramics. I think of them almost equally. I have never sold anything. Everything that I've ever collected, I still own today. And I consider the shipwrecks that I found personal to me. Somebody asked me, are you interested in Titanic? Titanic's in the news. I had people who've dived on Titanic. I was invited to dive on Titanic. I had two of my friends in the Titan sub. But Titanic's not my shipwreck. So I don't have the same interest to it as other things that I was connected to, like this project. And I don't know, maybe in 20 years, you'd have to ask, I think to be honest with you, I like my ceramics better. The thing is, when I was in graduate school, I wanted to be an art dealer. I'd spend all my time in the museums or trade. I was buying and selling prints to put myself through graduate school. I would go to for some reason in our small marine science department, we had a library there, and it was full of art books. I spent all my time there. If I really had my choice when I was younger to have had the career that I wanted, it would have been in the world of art and antiques. But that wasn't accessible to me, I think, for a number of reasons. Part of my background, where I grew up, and so on and so forth. Despite the fact my father was an antique dealer, it was easier for me to go and get a formal education in science, and that's what I did. So I enjoy both, but truly, I'm going to stop looking for shipwrecks, but I'll still collect art.
Brilliant. It's a great question, so thank you very much for that. That's spot on. And kind of, yeah, as someone, as you say, is an art dealer kind of pushing into creativity, it's an interesting thing, what you have in the background. So I suspect probably we've all got things going on in the background or even foreground for you, and hopefully some new ones as well from what we've learned today. And it's a great way to discuss these things. So thank you very much, David. Thank you very much all of our speakers who've been such a kind of empowering group today to talk us through. And thank you all very much for being part of our day, sharing it with you and those thoughts we've had together and your contributions. And we'll see you again, I hope.